Black CEO. Removed from VIP seat for white passenger minutes later, he bought the $4.2B Airline. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Oh, come on, there's no way you belong in 2A. The words hit like turbulence before takeoff. The man in the navy suit was already leaning forward, voice rising above the low hum of the cabin. His face was red, veins at his temple pulsing. Around them, first-class passengers froze mid-sip, phones half raised, pretending not to record while doing exactly that. David Cole didn't move. He sat still, hands folded over the leather armrest, eyes calm but unreadable. His tailored suit caught the pale cabin light, a quiet armor against the storm brewing 2 feet away. I said, the man snapped again. 2A is always my seat. Every Monday, every flight, ask anyone. A nervous laugh escaped a woman across the aisle. Someone whispered, "He works for the airline." Another added, "Then he should know better." David turned his head slowly. "I believe my boarding pass says otherwise." The man's jaw tightened. "Listen, pal, I've been flying this route for 10 years. I earned that seat." David's reply was soft, surgical. "Then maybe it's time you learn what ownership really means." They're risen down. With an tink. The silence that followed was heavier than the air pressure at 30,000 feet. A flight attendant stepped closer, eyes darting between them. "Sir, please, let's keep this calm." But calm was never the point. The white passenger, Stephen Marshall, regional director for Aerovista Airlines, thrust his ticket toward her. "Check it, he must have switched with someone. 2A is mine." The attendant hesitated, then looked at David's pass. "Mr. Cole, may I see?" He handed it over without a word. Her eyes widened. The name matched the manifest. "Still," she turned to Marshall, voice trembling. "Sir, technically he's assigned." "Technically?" Marshall barked. "Do you know who I am?" The phrase cracked through the cabin like a gunshot of entitlement. Before anyone could answer, the captain's voice murmured over the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." But the show had already begun. 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared at the aisle's end, summoned by complaint. Passengers started filming openly, now predators drawn to conflict. "Sir," one officer said, "we need you to step aside until we verify." Marshall smirked, confident. David rose slowly, unbuckling his belt with the same precision he'd used to sign a billion-dollar contract. He wasn't angry. He was measuring. He stood, half a head taller, yet spoke barely above a whisper. "Not today. This is mine." The officer looked uncertain. The other shifted awkwardly. Marshall, sensing victory, gestured toward the back. "See? Even they know." David exhaled once, quiet enough that only the microphone of a phone caught it. "Remember this moment," he said. The attendant swallowed hard. "Mr. Cole, please, just until we sort this out." David nodded once, collected his briefcase, and stepped into the aisle. Every eye followed him, some pitying, most curious, none understanding. As he walked past, whispers trailed like contrails in the cabin's stale air. At row 10, he paused beside the window, gaze steady on the runway lights outside. The reflection in the glass showed Marshall laughing, shaking hands with the officers like a man who'd won something. The engines rumbled beneath the floor, a quiet warning that the skies were shifting. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to David. David Cole took the seat they'd offered him, row 10, aisle, just behind the divider between luxury and everything else. The air felt different here, thicker, louder, human. The sound of overhead bins slamming, passengers arguing about carry-ons, the faint smell of instant coffee replacing champagne. A flight attendant handed him a thin blanket with a forced smile, the kind that tried to hide pity. "I'm really sorry about earlier, sir," she whispered. "Mr. Marshall, he's—" David didn't let her finish. "He's a symptom, not a surprise." Her throat tightened. She nodded and moved on. Outside the window, the jet bridge retracted with a hiss. Inside, whispers carried like radio static. That guy up front really made a scene. Yeah, but the other one, he didn't even fight back. Maybe he's scared. No, a woman murmured, glancing toward David. He's planning something. The plane began to taxi. Light flickered across his face as he unlocked his phone, thumb hovering above a single encrypted app labeled Apex. One message waited. Rachel, Executive VP. Board call in 15. Do you want to proceed with the review? He typed back 3 words. Initiate Skyline Protocol. Then he locked the screen and closed his eyes. For a moment, he let the hum of the engines fill the silence that arrogance had left behind. Every vibration through the cabin felt like restraint holding itself together. Row 10 was a microcosm of everything he'd spent his life, observing people quick to assume, slower to see. The man beside him adjusted his tie awkwardly, pretending not to recognize him. But recognition always came eventually. It just cost people more when it arrived too late. He could hear laughter drift from first class. Stephen Marshall's voice carried through the thin curtain. Some people just don't understand seniority. Another voice replied, chuckling, yeah, that guy looked like he stumbled into the wrong cabin. Is CS, and also will. The words landed, dull and predictable. But they didn't sting. They confirmed. David's hand rested on his briefcase, handcrafted leather, initials discreetly embossed. Inside was a folder with one contract. AeroVista Strategic Investment Agreement. Value, $4.2 billion. The deal had been in motion for months. His firm, Cole Aviation Holdings, was about to become the majority stakeholder in the very airline whose executive had just humiliated him on camera. He smiled faintly, not out of malice but clarity. The universe had a sense of choreography he respected. A turbulence warning blinked overhead. The seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice returned, cheerful and sterile. We'll be in the air shortly. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. David almost laughed. Relaxation was the one luxury arrogance never allowed. Across the aisle, a teenage boy glanced up from his phone, eyes wide. Mister, are you the guy from up front? David looked over. I suppose I am. My mom said that man was wrong. She raised you well, David said softly. Never forget that. The boy grinned shyly and turned back to his screen. The cabin lights dimmed. The curtain to first class swayed gently with the movement of air, just enough for David to see Marshall lift a glass of champagne, toasting to his own illusion of control. He wondered how many people like him mistook access for authority. Too many, and they always learned the same way, publicly. David's phone buzzed again. Rachel, confirmation received. Internal audit team mobilized. Expect impact in 30 minutes. He slid the phone face down on the tray table, eyes fixed ahead. The hum of the engines grew deeper. Passengers settled. Somewhere behind him, a baby cried, then stopped. The rhythm of the cabin became a pulse, steady and slow. He closed his eyes once more, not to rest, but to remember. The hangar lights from 15 years ago, when he'd first been told he'd never move past middle management because clients trust a certain look. The day he'd walked out and founded his own company in a rented storage space with 3 laptops and a borrowed desk. Every insult since then had been a lesson in patience, every humiliation a delayed investment. Now, the dividends were about to mature. The intercom crackled again. Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff. As the plane accelerated down the runway, gravity pressed him gently into the seat. His reflection in the window watched back, calm, resolute, unbothered. Behind that calm, empires were already shifting. The moment the wheels left the ground, his phone vibrated one last time. Rachel, market alert, AeroVista shares dropping. Someone leaked the footage. David opened his eyes. Good, he whispered. Let the world board early. He leaned back, the low hum of the engines, carrying the echo of his silence, measured, deliberate, and far louder than any outburst could ever be. This wasn't just a flight, it was a countdown. The plane leveled above the clouds, slicing through a band of soft gray light. From the window, the sky looked endless, calm, indifferent, like justice waiting its turn. David Cole rested his head lightly against the seat, eyes open, posture composed. Row 10 had turned silent. The gossip that once buzzed around him had died into uneasy quiet. Up front, the curtains separating first class from the rest of the cabin fluttered again. Through the narrow gap, He could see Stephen Marshall laughing, gesturing grandly with his champagne flute, as if trying to toast away the discomfort of what the passengers had witnessed. A few joined him. Others avoided eye contact. The hierarchy of the sky had reasserted itself on the surface. But beneath that calm, systems were already moving. David's phone lit up with a discreet notification. Skyline protocol active. He unlocked it. A secure dashboard filled the screen graphs, shifting, numbers updating, streams of coded data pulsing like a heartbeat. A message from Rachel appeared. Preliminary audits confirm Aero Vista overleveraged. Should we proceed to acquisition phase? He typed back only one word. Observe. He didn't need to rush. Power wasn't a sprint. It was an altitude. The attendant returned with a cup of water. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it down. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded, hesitating. I saw what happened earlier. It wasn't right. David looked up. What's your name? Clara. Well, Clara, he said, voice even. The world runs on flight paths. Some are built, some are inherited. I prefer the kind that climb. She blinked, unsure if it was a joke or wisdom, then smiled faintly and walked away. Across the aisle, the teenage boy from before whispered to his mother. Mom, he sounds like those people on TV, the ones who run companies. The woman glanced at David, then lowered her voice. Maybe he does. Maybe he is, she thought, but didn't dare say it aloud. David's eyes drifted to the reflection in the darkened screen ahead. His own face framed by the cabin's silver light. Calm, grounded, a force of nature contained. He opened an old photo from his gallery. A hanger. A younger version of himself in a worn jumpsuit. Grease on his hands, standing beside an unfinished aircraft wing. The caption below read, Dream high, build higher. It wasn't nostalgia, it was measurement. He remembered that day vividly. His supervisor, a man with the same smirk Stephen Marshall had worn minutes ago, telling him he'd make a fine technician but not the kind of face clients expect. David had smiled even then. You'll remember this face, he'd said. Maybe not today. 15 years later, that prophecy was still collecting interest. A soft ding cut through the memory. The intercom announced cruising altitude. The plane steadied. A gentle cart clinked down the aisle. Passengers relaxed, unaware that somewhere on servers spinning beneath the earth, their airline's financial architecture was beginning to tilt. David scrolled through reports. Every metric he'd once ignored now had meaning. Operating losses, insurance exposure, supplier disputes. Aero Vista was bleeding internally, slowly, invisibly. The arrogance of its executives had been plaster over cracks in the fuselage. Now one public humiliation was all it would take for investors to lose faith. The kind of faith markets price in billions. He closed the app, turned off the screen, and looked outside again. The horizon glowed faintly orange, morning chasing them eastward. For a moment, the clouds below looked like marble solid from a distance, fragile up close. He whispered to himself, altitude changes perspective. So will this. From the front of the cabin, laughter burst again, forced, brittle. A flight attendant drew the curtain completely, trying to muffle it. The gesture said what words could not. Shame travels faster than sound. David sipped his water slowly, then reached for his notebook. He wrote one line across a blank page. They took a seat. I'll take the sky. The plane hit a small pocket of turbulence, jolting slightly. A few passengers gasped. David didn't move. He'd learned long ago. Control isn't about still air. It's about staying centered when the air shifts. Moments later, his phone buzzed again. Rachel's update appeared in coded shorthand. RA. Press contact requesting statement re-viral video. DC. No statement. Let the silence breathe. He set the phone down again. Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, flooding his reflection with gold. For a fleeting second, the glass became a mirror between what was seen and what was coming. He closed his notebook and reclined slightly, calm amid the hum of turbines. To anyone watching, he was just another passenger, quiet, polite, unremarkable. But the quiet ones were the architects. The polite ones built kingdoms without raising their voices. And David Cole was already rearranging the sky above them. Before the seatbelt sign flickered off, a headline flashed silently across the world's financial feeds. Aero Vista stocks slide 12% amid viral in-flight altercation. Up front, Stephen Marshall raised his glass again, oblivious. Back in row 10, David smiled faintly, eyes on the clouds. It's starting. The cabin lights dimmed to a muted amber. Somewhere beyond the clouds, dawn was beginning to fracture the horizon. But inside the plane, everything felt suspended time, tension, gravity itself. David Cole adjusted his cufflink, the small silver C glinting briefly in the low light. A symbol few recognized, yet every airline boardroom feared. Up front, laughter still leaked from behind the first-class curtain. Stephen Marshall's voice again, buoyed by arrogance and champagne. Unbelievable what people try to get away with these days, he said, loud enough for the nearest passengers to hear. Entitlement has no boundaries. David heard every word. He didn't need to respond. People like Marshall mistook silence for submission, never realizing silence was just strategy, waiting for its signal. His phone buzzed softly against the armrest. Rachel. The videos hit 1 million views. Public sentiment's turning. Are we pulling the deal? David's thumb hovered above the screen. He typed 2 words. Cancel everything. He didn't add a period. He didn't need to. In his world, punctuation was policy. Within seconds, the command traveled through encrypted servers, triggering a cascade across continents. In New York, a boardroom full of attorneys began receiving termination alerts. In London, financial terminals at dawn flashed red as billions in projected equity vanished from the AeroVista portfolio. In Singapore, Cole Aviation's legal division suspended all merger communications, citing ethical misalignment. The Skyline Protocol was live procedural revenge in real time. David exhaled slowly. No anger, no satisfaction, just execution. The kind of justice that moved like mathematics, precise, silent, undeniable. The flight attendant, Clara, passed again, her hands still trembling slightly. "Sir," she whispered, "is everything all right? You look calm." David smiled faintly. Calm is what comes after clarity. She hesitated. "I saw the news, that video. It's everywhere already." "I know," he said. "Truth travels faster than planes. Is we're gonna shap." From the seat pocket, he pulled a thin folder, the original AeroVista Strategic Investment Agreement. He flipped to the final page, his own signature beside Stephen Marshall's. A simple mark that, until 5 minutes ago, guaranteed the airline's survival. He tore it cleanly in half, then again, letting the pieces rest like ash on his tray table. A man across the aisle glanced over, eyes widening. "You're him," he stammered. "The CEO in the video?" David turned to him, voice low. "Not just in the video." The man said nothing more. He understood. The rest of the cabin seemed to sense it too, an invisible current shifting through recycled air. Outside, sunlight finally broke the edge of the sky, flooding the cabin with a slow gold. It illuminated the faint lines of David's face, the stillness of someone who had stopped being underestimated long ago. His phone buzzed one last time. "Rachel. Contract officially voided. Their CFO just called begging for reconsideration." David replied, "Let him wait until we land." He looked out the window again. The world below was waking, unaware that, in midair, an empire had begun to fall. Then he spoke quietly, to no one in particular. "They wanted a seat. I offered them the sky. They chose small." The engines roared a little louder as the plane pushed eastward, cutting through light like a blade. Every mile forward widened the distance between humiliation and consequence. David Cole closed his eyes and rested his head back, as calm as ever, while 30,000 feet below, the market began to tremble. The flight glided steady over the Atlantic, clouds below rippling like pale silk. From the outside, it was an ordinary morning. Inside, a global empire was tilting on its axis, and only one man knew it. David Cole's eyes stayed on the glass, but his mind had already left the cabin. It drifted backward 15 years, maybe more, to a hangar in Detroit that smelled of jet fuel and exhaustion. He'd been 26 then, a maintenance engineer with ideas bigger than the sky and a paycheck smaller than rent. Every shift, he stayed after hours, sketching redesigns of turbine cores on scrap paper. When the company's vice president caught him one night, she'd laughed and said, "You've got ambition, Cole, but not the face for investors." That sentence had stayed with him longer than her name. So he built something no investor could deny. Apex Stratos, his first company. Born in a basement with 3 engineers and 1 used server. Within 10 years, it became a cornerstone of global aviation logistics. Then came Cole Aviation Holdings, an umbrella of power that quietly owned air routes, maintenance contracts, leasing firms, and partial stakes in 7 international carriers, including one called Aerovista Airlines. He'd bought into Aerovista during their crisis years, restructuring debt, modernizing fleet systems, rebuilding trust. The same executives who now ignored his emails had once begged him for investment. Irony was an expensive passenger, and it never missed a flight. When Rachel first proposed the $4.2 billion acquisition, he'd hesitated. Too public, he'd said. He preferred to build power quietly, unseen. But Aerovista's CEO had pushed for it a merger that would save their balance sheets and, symbolically, hand them back credibility. That same CEO was Stephen Marshall. David had signed the preliminary agreement last week. He could have withdrawn any time, but he didn't. He wanted to believe professionalism could transcend prejudice. He wanted to prove that decency could coexist with dominance. And then came the Flight Seat 2A, the insult, the cameras. Now the stakes weren't just business. They were moral architecture. His phone vibrated again. Rachel's update flashed. Media tracking. Number. Seat 2. A trending globally. Shareholders requesting statements. He typed, prepare controlled leak. Focus on leadership ethics, not personal grievance. Then he added a second message. Also, buy the dip. He slipped the phone into his jacket and looked up. The attendant, Clara, stood a few rows ahead, handing out breakfast trays. Her expression had changed, no longer anxious, but watchful, almost reverent. Through the curtain, he could still hear Marshall, laughing too loudly, pretending nothing had happened. David wondered if he had any idea how close his kingdom was to freefall. The arrogance of unchecked privilege always sounded the same, like a man whistling in a burning building. Outside, the sky brightened into gold. David remembered his grandmother's voice from long ago. When they don't let you sit at the table, child, build your own house, then sell them the chairs. He smiled. You were right, Grandma, he murmured. Every insult, every locked door, every smirk had led to this altitude 33,000 feet above the world, yet grounded in purpose. For years, David had carried his success like a secret weapon, invisible until the moment it needed to strike. That moment had arrived. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood, and walked toward the front of the cabin. Passengers turned, phones ready again, sensing a new scene about to unfold. He stopped at the curtain separating him from first class. His voice, calm but cutting, broke the silence. Mr. Marshall, he said evenly, you may want to call your board before we land. They're going to need a miracle. The laughter on the other side died instantly. David returned to his seat, eyes on the horizon. The sky ahead was clear, and for the first time, so was the balance sheet of justice. By the time the plane pierced the morning sun, the damage was already irreversible. On the ground, the world had caught fire not from chaos, but from precision. Inside Cole Aviation's Manhattan Command Center, 10 analysts sat before glowing screens. Graphs danced, contracts dissolved, and notification tones filled the glass-walled room like quiet thunder. At 7:03 a.m., the words "transaction terminated by primary investor" appeared on the global exchange log beside the Aerovista ticker. The number $4. 2B flashed once, then grayed out. Rachel stood at the center of it all. Her voice clipped, efficient. Legal confirms withdrawal. PR ready? A junior associate nodded nervously. Statement drafted, ma'am. Cole Aviation Holdings has terminated its pending acquisition of Aerovista Airlines due to concerns over corporate culture and ethics. Rachel's mouth curved slightly. Perfect. Send it to Bloomberg first. Let dignity make the morning news. Back on the plane, David's phone vibrated twice, a silent echo of power moving continents away. He didn't need to read the updates to know what they said. The world below was adjusting its altitude to match his. Through the cabin speakers, the captain's voice broke the quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent. Estimated arrival time, 25 minutes. Passengers stirred. Seatbelts clicked. Laptops closed. But up front, in first class, the tension was thick enough to taste. Stephen Marshall's phone hadn't stopped ringing for 10 minutes. His forced smile was cracking under the weight of reality. He turned to a colleague across the aisle. They're saying the acquisition's off, he muttered. That can't be right. We were signing next week. The colleague swallowed. It's not just off. It's public. Marshall's hand shook. Public? The man showed him a headline on his screen. Aero Vista deal canceled mid-flight following viral passenger incident. For the first time since takeoff, Stephen went silent. Meanwhile, David leaned back, watching the clouds thin beneath him. His reflection in the window was unreadable. Calm wasn't just habit, it was heritage. Rachel's next message appeared. Market reaction. Aerovista shares down 31%. Media requesting comment. What should I say? In Mainsby said elonged. It is not is rather. Dave Val tests work all with stable. David typed, say nothing. The silence is the statement. At that exact moment, in a conference room 20,000 feet below, Aerovista's board members were shouting over one another. Their chairman, pale and sweating, slammed his fist on the table. Find him. Fix this. I don't care what it takes. But there was nothing left to fix. The funding lifeline was gone. Their investors were pulling out. The empire they'd built on borrowed prestige was unraveling before breakfast. Inside the plane, David folded his hands neatly on the tray table. The hum of the engines felt like applause restrained, mechanical, deserved. He thought of all the times he'd been told to wait, to prove, to earn permission for spaces already his. Today, patience had become weaponry. The intercom clicked again. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. Clara passed through the aisle, collecting glasses. When she reached David's row, she hesitated. Sir, that man up front, he's been on the phone nonstop. They looked terrified. David's eyes didn't move from the window. They should be. Her voice dropped. You did something, didn't you? He turned to her, calm, almost kind. I reminded them who really owns the sky. As the plane began its descent, the city unfolded beneath a mosaic of light and consequence. In Aerovista's stock exchange feed, trading halted. The ticker froze at negative 38%. On social media, the clip of the confrontation crossed 20 million views. And in the corner office of Cole Aviation, Rachel closed her laptop with a quiet exhale. Correction complete, she said to no one in particular. 30,000 feet above, David Cole opened his eyes to the sound of the landing gear locking into place. The plane shuddered once, the perfect metaphor for a company about to hit the ground harder than gravity intended. He straightened his tie and whispered, almost to the clouds, justice doesn't shout, it lands. By the time the plane's wheels kissed the runway, the world had already chosen sides. The hum of the engines faded into the buzz of incoming notifications. Passenger phones lit up like a constellation of truth. Every news outlet had the same headline. Black CEO removed from VIP seat airline deal collapses mid-flight. David didn't need to look. He could feel it, the shift in air pressure that comes when humiliation reverses direction. The same passengers who'd whispered judgment an hour ago were now whispering awe. That's him, someone breathed behind him. The guy from the video. Wait, he's the David Cole? Like Cole Aviation? This quailed. Each word spread through the cabin like current through metal. Phones angled discreetly in his direction. Clara, the flight attendant, stood frozen near the galley, eyes wide. He finally turned his phone face up. Notifications scrolled in endless succession. Board confirmations, press alerts, investment reports. Rachel's latest message was simple. Viral impact exponential. Hashtags. Number seat 2A, number dignity flies, number Cole effect. He typed back, let them trend. The world's learning altitude. The captain's voice broke through the murmur. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated as we taxi to the gate. But no one was listening. All eyes were locked on David. Up front, Stephen Marshall was unraveling in real time. His phone pressed to his ear, voice cracking. I understand, but... He stopped mid-sentence. You can't just pull funding, silence. Then a whisper that carried down the aisle. They're saying it's over. He turned slowly, and for the first time since boarding, his eyes met David's. There was no arrogance left, only disbelief, the look of a man watching his altitude indicator drop to 0. David didn't gloat. He just held the gaze a second longer than necessary, then looked away. Power didn't need eye contact to be felt. The plane came to a full stop. Passengers rose, some pretending to stretch, others pretending not to film. David stayed seated, waiting, as he always did, for the noise to fade. A businessman 2 rows up turned toward him, nervous but sincere. Mr. Cole, I just want to say what they did was wrong. You handled it. David lifted a hand gently. It's handled. The man nodded, embarrassed, and sat back down. Outside the window, camera flashes were already flickering near the terminal. Reporters had gathered, alerted by the trending storm. Words like discrimination, corporate meltdown, and executive accountability swirled across live feeds. Clara leaned closer, voice trembling. They're waiting for you out there, David replied, calm as ever. Good, let them see what respect looks like standing. The seatbelt sign chimed off. First-class passengers scrambled to be first out, but none dared to look him in the eye. As he stood, the cabin seemed to shift around him, a hush of consequence. He adjusted his jacket, lifted his briefcase, and stepped into the aisle. Phones tilted to follow. Every step toward the exit felt cinematic, unhurried, deliberate, the measured walk of a man who'd turned insult into infrastructure. Before stepping off the plane, he paused near Stephen Marshall, who sat slumped, face drained. David looked down at him, not angry, not vengeful, just final. Next time you talk about seniority, he said quietly, remember it doesn't come from tenure. It comes from ownership. Marshall said nothing. The words landed harder than any verdict. David turned and walked out into the sunlight. Cameras flashed, questions flew, microphones reached. He didn't stop. The only sound was the echo of his shoes against the jet bridge, calm, rhythmic, absolute. Behind him, Aerovista's world was collapsing in real time. In trading rooms across cities, investors dumped stock. News anchors repeated the same phrase again and again. Within hours, the airline lost nearly 40% of its value, all triggered by a single act of arrogance at 30,000 feet. And somewhere above that chaos, David Cole kept walking not away from the storm, but through it. The sky, once denied to him, was finally his stage. The terminal was chaos by the time David Cole stepped through the gate. Reporters pressed against barriers, shouting questions that collided with each other like storm winds. Flashbulbs burst, security guards moved to shield him, but he didn't flinch. He walked straight through the noise, posture perfect, gaze fixed, the kind of calm that silences volume without saying a word. Behind him, Stephen Marshall emerged moments later, pale and sweating, clutching his phone like a life raft. Cameras swung instantly toward him. Reporters shouted, Mr. Marshall, is it true the $4.2B deal was canceled mid-flight? He tried to speak, but his words collapsed under the weight of flash and consequence. David paused briefly at the terminal doors. One reporter shouted, Mr. Cole, are you seeking legal action? In 26. In together. He stopped, turned slightly toward the crowd. No, he said evenly. I'm seeking standards. Then he walked away. Outside, black cars waited in a perfect line. Rachel stood beside the first, tablet in hand, face calm, but eyes alight with restrained triumph. Everything's confirmed, she said as he approached. Aerovista stock froze at -41. Investors are pulling out. The board's panicking. David adjusted his cuff, the faintest trace of a smile appearing. They'll learn accountability is more expensive than apology. They entered the car. The door closed, muting the chaos. Inside, silence returned David's preferred element. Rachel handed him the tablet. The newsfeed was a symphony of collapse. CNN, airline faces collapse after viral discrimination scandal. Bloomberg, Cole Aviation, withdraws $4.2B deal, citing ethical concerns. It wouldn't shost, Reuters. CEO Stephen Marshall under fire. Stockholders demand resignation. David scrolled briefly, then set the tablet aside. Prepare the buyout paperwork, he said. Rachel blinked. You're still going to buy them? Of course, he said quietly. Just not at 4.2. I'll take it for 1. Rachel smiled, half disbelief, half admiration. That's ruthless. David's eyes stayed on the window. Not ruthless, he murmured. Efficient. We don't punish ignorance. We price it. Outside, New York's skyline stretched ahead, tall and indifferent. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost moving through his own legend. Hours later, the footage of his calm exit from the airport dominated every platform. Millions replayed the moment he said, I'm seeking standards. The line became a global refrain, a quiet anthem for dignity. Merchants printed it on T-shirts. Journalists called it the most expensive sentence ever spoken. That evening, the Aerovista board convened an emergency meeting. Stephen Marshall sat at the head of the table for the last time, surrounded by silent faces and glowing screens. Every director had the same alert on their phones. Share value down 47%. Cole Aviation files intent to acquire controlling stake. Marshall tried to speak. "We can fix this." The chairman cut him off. "You already did," he said coldly. "You fixed it for him." They voted unanimously to remove him before the hour was over. Across town, David stood in a high-rise conference room overlooking the city. Rachel handed him the final report. "They've agreed to the sale. Terms pending your approval." He nodded once. "Lower the offer by another 5%. Humility should have interest." She hesitated. "And the statement?" "In the Silcium slider. When the 7 city protection." David turned toward the window, the skyline reflected in his eyes. "Draft it simply," he said. "Cole Aviation welcomes Aerovista into its family of companies. Effective immediately." He paused, then added, "And one more line. Not revenge correction." Rachel's smile was slow, certain. "Yes, sir." As she left the room, David stayed by the window. The city below pulsed with headlights and headlines, a living machine powered by pride, risk, and retribution. He watched it all in silence, his reflection merging with the view outside. The man they'd asked to move from seat 2A now owned the wings that carried them all. A year later, the world had changed subtly, but permanently. What began as a confrontation in seat 2A had become a case study in corporate ethics, leadership, and restraint. Aerovista Airlines, now under full ownership of Cole Aviation Holdings, was reborn with a new name, AURUM, Air, and a new slogan painted boldly on every fuselage. "Every seat earned, every passenger equal." Inside the renovated headquarters in Manhattan, sunlight spilled across glass walls etched with that same line. Employees moved quietly, respectful, aware that they worked inside a story bigger than their paychecks. Posters of their new CEO hung in the lobby, not glamorous portraits, but simple black and white shots of David Cole shaking hands with ground crews, flight attendants, and engineers. Beneath each photo, a caption read, "Dignity takes flight." Reporters still called weekly, hoping for quotes about the seat that changed the skies. David always declined. "It's not about a seat," he'd tell his communications director. "It's about what you do after you stand up. Is mod of then, is a knot of lime in the place self you are, and not of that." In one corner of his office stood a polished wood plaque, small, understated. On it, the original boarding pass from that flight, seat 2A. The paper had yellowed slightly, but he'd had it sealed under glass. A reminder, not a trophy. Every year since, he funded the Sky Dignity Initiative, a global foundation providing leadership scholarships for underrepresented pilots, mechanics, and aviation students. The first class of recipients had just graduated, 30 young men and women from cities around the world, all wearing pins in the shape of a tiny silver wing. During the press ceremony, one student, a young black woman from Houston, asked shyly, "Mr. Cole, what made you start all this?" He smiled gently. "Because the world still confuses power with volume," he said. "And sometimes, the quietest correction travels the farthest." The audience applauded softly, but David barely heard them. His gaze had drifted to the window, where a jet bearing his new airline's gold insignia soared past against the morning light. That night, alone in his penthouse overlooking the Hudson, he stood by the glass, watching the skyline shimmer. He wasn't thinking about revenge or victory. He was thinking about equilibrium, about how justice, real justice, never shouted. It simply arrived, steady and absolute, like sunrise through fog. His phone buzzed once. A message from Rachel. "Final audit complete. Aerovista debts cleared. AURUM air profitability exceeds projections by 26%. Congratulations." He typed back one line. "Justice lands softly." He placed the phone down and poured himself a glass of wine. Cabernet, same vintage as the one spilled on him that day. He raised it gently toward the city. "To the skies," he said quietly. "To balance. Is that ready, man, to the $dollars other way?" Unwary to southward ranted in from the Bonners. The next morning, newspapers carried a photograph of David at the Foundation's gala. The caption beneath it read, "From humiliation to legacy, the man who bought the airline that once denied him his seat." But David Cole never read the headlines. He was already boarding another flight economy, this time, unannounced as always. When the attendant offered him an upgrade, he smiled and declined. I'm fine right here, he said. Every seat matters. The engines roared, the plane lifted, and sunlight poured across his face. No music, no applause, just altitude, earned the quiet way. And somewhere, high above the world that once measured him by color, a truth whispered through the clouds. Power doesn't prove worth. Character does. David Cole closed his eyes, feeling the hum of the sky he now owned. Not revenge. Not even victory. Just correction delivered at cruising altitude.